Welcome to the Troubled Artists Podcast, Episode 5, Kirsten Rudberg.
So welcome back to the Troubled Artists Podcast. Today I am here with Kirsten Rudberg. Kirsten is an MDIV graduate and self-identified panentheist and an accomplished author whose books were recently acquired by George R.R. Martin's bookstore in Santa Fe. She's also a screenwriter, producer, and as well as a fellow podcaster, a firm believer in the potential of humanity. And Kirsten uses her voice across various mediums to inspire collective growth and compassion with a particular passion for defending and preserving our shared environments. So thank you again, Kirsten, for being a part of the show. So before I begin, I do like to ask this question. Tell us in your own words, who is Kirsten Rudberg?
Haha, I ask this question on my podcast all the time, and guests invariably react sometimes with dismay. And you're putting me on the spot, but I can handle it. And I appreciate the question. I think that I'm someone who's trying to figure it all out. I have a master's of divinity. As you said, I'm a panentheist, which means that I believe everything is sacred. Everything has consciousness. So you could say I'm a little bit of an animist in that respect. But really, I'm a creative. And I didn't really understand I was a creative until when I entered seminary and I began my master's of divinity. I had to take these tests, personality tests. I think I counted them. There were like 700 questions. And, they wanted to make sure you were in the right program, which I respect. So I answered all the questions and I met with a gentleman who'd been doing this for years. He was a psychotherapist, but also a Lutheran pastor. And he said, I have to tell you, you're an artist. And I thought, what? Wait, what are you talking about? Oh my God, that cannot be a real thing. And he said, yes, it is. And I was like, I don't even understand what's happening right now. Because, when I grew up in my family, it was all about going to high school, graduating, going to college, graduating, getting into the corporate world, getting married and having kids. And by the time I started seminary, I had had an unconventional life. I never got married, partly because I didn't want to, and partly because I love the adventure of life, and just marriage for me meant probably that I'd have to stay in the same place and couldn't travel. And there's other reasons too, but we don't need to go into those right now. But all this to say that I, was completely gobsmacked because no one had ever suggested artists could be who I was. The second thing I was science and technology, and which is true because I loved to read science magazines since I was a kid. But I have this artist thing, and I'm still trying to figure out what that means. And so, that's why I have a podcast. That's why I have my books. That's why I have my other creative endeavors. So I'd say, yeah, at my heart, the results of that test ring true. I'm an artist.
Mm-hmm. That's really nice to hear. I'm an artist too, and I'm sure everybody listening in are also artists as well. Again, it's all, I do like film, and then, like I'm sure everyone out there, writers, directors, painters, poets, everyone like that, I'm sure is listening in, and they love to hear that story of another fellow artist. So thank you for sharing that. I am curious, how did your global upbringing help shape your creative outlook?
Oh my gosh. Well, when you're like living in something and you don't understand how special it is. When I was growing up overseas in Guyana and then in Pakistan, oh so long ago, in a galaxy far, far away. That's my homage to your background right there. Um, I have to say that you don't understand how it's influencing you. And when we moved back to the States, the culture here was so jarring and different and discordant for me. I mean, I grew up with kids from all over the world. We'd go and visit. We went to Kashmir. We went to New Delhi. We went to all these places all over the world, the Maldives, Sri Lanka. I got to see so much of the world. you don't understand how special it is while it's happening, but especially because you're a kid. I mean, quite honestly. So for years, I didn't really understand um, until I went to seminary, to be honest, and heard other stories from my people in my cohort about how they'd grown up. And as a matter of fact, one of the people in my cohort, one of the weeks we were there for orientation, started weeping because, and she was in her 60s, her father, one day, she'd brought an African American girl home from school in about fourth grade to play. And after the little girl went home, her dad, I mean, he just destroyed her and said, "You will never bring another human being like that into this house. We don't have people like that in this house." And she was crying in this orientation because the memory was still so present of the shame and humiliation. And also, it felt good to her, the rightness of having a friendship, and her father just took that away from her. So that's kind of when I thought, oh my gosh, my childhood was completely, I mean, wow. I mean, I was around kids from everywhere. I was in cultures all over the world. I got to eat the food, see the architecture, appreciate the beauty, not only of the surroundings, but the people. And that was when I kind of first realized, oh my gosh, Kirsten, your childhood was so special and such a gift, and it's informed everything that I've done in this life so far. Absolutely everything, whether it's, the way I approach strangers, which is always with an open heart and a belief in the goodness of other humans. Um, someone described it to me. They said, "Oh, you had real intimacy with people of other religions, people with other skin colors when you were young. That is why you're so open-hearted and you like everyone. You had intimacy with people who were different from you from an early age." And I guess I'd never thought of it that way. You know, it has changed everything. I believe in difference. I believe difference is beautiful. Sometimes in the States, I feel like there are certain sectors in the States that want everyone to be the same religion or want everyone to like the same things. I love when things are different. I love the ways people show up in the world, the multiplicity of people. But that's because when I was a kid, I lived it. I understood that that was a good thing. And it literally has shaped me from then on to who I am as a human being. And what a gift for me.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like all of those like creative choices that we have as human beings, they help shape us who we are, that difference, that we have is just it just makes everyone so unique, when I went to film school, I met so many other, filmmakers and directors and writers, producers, and all of them had such a different take of just their storytelling and what it takes to make a film, and just listening to their ideas and just hearing what they have to say, everyone has such a unique mindset, it's really amazing, and I'd really love that everyone has like that sort of difference in them. Again, not just in film, but writing or painting or whatever it is, everyone is just so unique in that way. And it's really, really special. Um,
Absolutely.
hmm of course. And I am curious, because you did mention that you're a panentheist. So in what ways did panentheism help guide your storytelling, whether it was in writing, your books or your screenplays or like that?
Oh gosh, I I mean, you have to know that I believe we live in a creative universe. And, whether people want to call it God or source or, I don't know, the great spirit, energy, all of it is legitimate. And I believe that that energy and that great spirit wants to co create with us and wants to experience creation, experience life, experience the world through us. And what that means is then we're all part of this great mystery. Whatever we're creating, whatever we're engaging in, whatever, I have had experiences where, I have felt an idea come just like that. And I think, where did that come from? And sometimes it feels like, I don't know if you have ever experienced this, but it feels like this divine kind of gift where you're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to take this and run with it. I don't know where it's going to take me, but I love this idea and it's so fun. So it's almost, in the ancient days, they would say working with the muses, right? The muses come down and they work with certain humans, often called artists, and they give them ideas. They give them the gift of inspiration, the gift of bringing something new into the world. And so, when I'm, I don't know, cogitating or trying to be artistic, shall we say, or create something, I'm always thinking of myself as working in tandem or in partnership with the energy, that great source, that is in the world and gives everything life. Um, Trees, plants, insects. I think everything is sacred and wants to have a conversation with us. And you never know where the good ideas are going to come from. You could be just sitting in a chair and staring at a juniper bush, and all of a sudden you'll have this revelation and you'll think, oh my gosh, that is the solution to that problem I have with writing my book. I don't know. Had no idea where that came from, but maybe it was the juniper bush that gave it to you. So yeah, panentheism just allows me to understand that I'm not alone in the universe, that I am part of something greater than me, and that it always has something to teach me or something to tell me. And I can utilize those teachings, utilize those tellings in order to create beauty for others in whatever way that looks like. Because I do believe that we're all called to, we all have gifts. We're all supposed to create a better life for other humans in whatever way that looks. Everybody does it differently. For me, apparently, I'm an artist. So that means I get to bring hopefully inspiration and beauty and fun. I'm all about fun to other people in the world. So yeah, did I answer that question okay?
Yeah, yeah, that was a good answer. I feel like, yeah, that's everyone's aspirations as an artist. We want to go out and we want to help like change the world, or try to shift people's perspective on certain things. I really liked what you said about like how an idea can just sort of pop out of nowhere, like how you mentioned looking at a juniper bush. Sometimes, I've had ideas hit me like when I'm just like sleeping and then all of a sudden like 3 in the morning, I get an idea and I gotta like write it down, because if I don't, then I'm gonna forget it, and then so, so moments like that, is I can totally relate with that as being a fellow artist. Going back into your religious background, you did mention about the Camino and walking that. So I am curious to know if you could just describe a magic moment from that Camino experience.
Yeah, a lot of people are like, what do you mean you're walking the Camino? This doesn't make any sense. That is a Roman Catholic endeavor. Why would you be walking the Camino? And all I can say is that, I did date a gentleman who was Roman Catholic for 5 years, and he brought up the Camino every once in a while. And I thought, okay, how do I not know about this? And what the heck is it? And basically, I did some research, and it's an ancient pilgrimage route for the Catholic Church for pilgrims to kind of show their devotion to God, to the saints. They would walk all over Europe to Santiago and go to the church there and sign the book and say, I did it, as a sign of their devotion to God. So the Camino was interesting for me. A lot of people do the La Puy route, which as the Camino has been discovered, is now the party route. And I thought to myself, if I'm going to do this, because I don't do things halfway. A lot of people go and they walk for a week, and then the next year they come back and start where they left off. I was like, I'm going to do this whole hog. I'm going to do this. I did a ton of research. I was like, I'm going to figure out which one is the best and has solitude, because I want to have this be really intentional. So here I am, and I find out that the route from southern France to northern France is, it says, arduous, physically arduous, but there's a lot of solitude. And I was like, okay, I've never been to Europe. I've always been to these other countries all over the world, but never to Europe. Okay. And I'm sure everything's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. Well, I get there. I took a ship from Miami to Barcelona, got off in Barcelona, spent a week with a friend, then took 3 trains to southern France, and then started walking. And unbeknownst to me, Europe and parts of France had the worst weather they'd had in 90 years that year. I think I was walking at the beginning of June and got hailed on and snowed on when I was walking through the mountains. Most people quit because the weather was so terrible. There was flooding at Lourdes. It was just not ideal. It was really, really terrible. And so when I asked for solitude, like literally everybody quit. So I was like walking and I'm alone like all the time. But it was unspeakably beautiful. And I had so many moments where I felt really, really seen, really taken care of, and frankly, looked after, to be honest. Anywhere from one night, because the weather was so terrible and everybody was quitting walking, a lot of the hostels and auberges closed because the people were like, nobody's coming through. Why would we hire staff to make food and do the laundry? So there was one night walking out of Montpellier where I had nowhere to stay and I was exhausted. And I was walking and walking. I called multiple places. They said, we're closed, we're closed. This one place I was told, don't stay there. The man's kind of creepy. So here I was in the forest and I had nowhere to go. So I thought, okay, so you have to know everybody on the Camino has a backpack, but they don't bring anything because you're supposed to be really light. You're supposed to be able to travel quickly. And I brought everything. I had my rain fly, my tent, my thermarest. I had like everything because I'm like, I need to be ready for all circumstances. Okay. This is just what's going to happen. So I'm like, I have everything to camp. So I climbed off the trail back into the French forest. I found a little clearing and I set up my camp. And it rained that night. Thank God I had a rain fly. But in the middle of the night, I don't know what it was. Something walked past me and it walked really, really close to the tent and it had 2 legs. And I don't know what it was. I could hear it coming and I knew that it could probably see my tent. And I was just praying as a single woman. I'm like, please keep going. I don't know what's happening here. And when I woke up in the morning, there was a big white feather on my tent. And I thought to myself, okay, I think this is a sign. I'm being told that I'm being looked after and watched after. And so the next day I got like no sleep. I walk into, and I'm just going to butcher this. It's a World UNESCO Heritage Site called St. Guillaume in the Desert. Okay, I just butchered it. That's not how they say it. And it's so beautiful. It's this amazing old fortress city where the beauty is ridiculous. And so I walk into this hotel because I was like, I got to get a hotel. I'm just, this is just what's happening. And everything on me is wet because it had rained. I was so gross. And they let me into the hotel, which was this, I don't know, 1,000-year-old just building. And the next morning, I was getting ready to leave, and I was the only one in the hotel again because the weather was so bad. And the woman said, I was eating breakfast, and she was like, oh, what are you doing? And I said, I'm walking the Camino. And she said, alone? And I said, yes. And she said, oh my goodness. And she came back like 15 minutes later with this huge, kind of like big bag picnic basket of food because she was like, I don't want you to go hungry. I'm so worried about you. Here's all this free food. And I was like, oh my gosh, thank you so much. I'm so grateful. Another thing that happened was I was in another town and I stayed for a few days because I was so tired. And I found this restaurant. And the young woman who lived there or who worked there, she was about 25. And she and I struck up a friendship. And just to let you know, don't order an omelet in the morning, even though in the States it's regular, it's a dinner food. And so everybody, I was the tourist who ordered eggs in the morning. They were all making fun of me, which is fine. I don't care. But anyway, I went back in the afternoon a few days later, and she and I were talking, and she wanted to practice her English. So I was like, great, that's fine with me. And I found out more about her life. And she told me, she wanted to live this adventurous life. She wanted to live this big life, one where she saw the world and just, wasn't tied down anywhere. And I said, how did you even come to be this way? And she said, well, let me tell you. I had a really dear friend that I grew up with. And when she was around 20 or 22, and she said, and by the way, she was an incredible artist. She was just like the best artist. She came to me one day and she said, they told me I have cancer and I'm going to die in a few years. And I was flabbergasted and destroyed because here was my friend who was not going to live for more than a few years. And she turned to me, she gave me this piece of art, and she said, I've always wanted to live in Brazil. I'm going to go live in Brazil and die in Brazil for as long as I have. And she said, and then she died a couple years later. And I said, oh my goodness, I am so sorry. And I said, that's actually interesting because the only reason I can do this Camino and go on this walk for as long as I can, which I did end up walking about 3.5 months, is because my dear friend Linda died unexpected. I mean, sort of unexpectedly. She had a really rare form of Parkinson's that she got and died within 5 years. And I said, I'm so sorry for you, but my dear friend passed away too, and that's why I'm doing the Camino, and it's the only reason I can do the Camino. And I said, so I understand. I mean, the loss of a dear friend. And she said, hold on a second. And she like ran in the back and she came out with this piece of art that her friend who had passed away had made. And it's the most gorgeous thing you've ever seen. It's basically a young woman in a field who's spinning around looking beautifully. And she said, here it is. And I said, oh my gosh, that's you. That's who you should be, like brave, like spinning in a field, like believing in life. And she said, I'm going to give this to you. I have a really strong feeling that this piece of art by my friend is supposed to be yours. And so she gave me this gorgeous piece of art, which I could not even believe how beautiful it was. Thank goodness it fit in my backpack along with everything else. I couldn't believe it. And I just thought, what a gift and what a benediction about that I was in the right place at the right time. I was creating friendships and relationships with strangers. And we talked about the stories that we shared. We talked about the losses that we shared. And then as a parting farewell, she gives me this insane gift from her dear friend who passed away in her 20s. And it's like one of the most precious things I own. It's always on my wall. And I look at it and it reminds me of how good we can be to each other, how we can show up for each other and be kind to one another, even the most unlikeliest of places where I was an absolute stranger to not only Europe, but also France and this woman. And I was just shown such generosity of spirit and kindness and love by the people in France that I don't even understand when people say people in France are rude. I was met with nothing but kindness and generosity. So those are just a couple of my stories.
Yeah, no, I mean, that was wonderful to hear because, just hearing people's stories and like hearing that, and seeing how they grew up, it helps make them who they are, and I'm very sorry to hear about the loss of your friend. But it was really interesting to hear about these paintings that you got and just how beautiful that they are. I recently had an uncle who had passed away, and he was also a painter, and he loved Jesus, and actually, that painting right up there is one of the paintings that he did. It's you can't really see it, but it's a cactus, and it's in like this field, and it's surrounded by like the solar system, like Earth and Mars and Jupiter and all that. And then I also have a self-portrait that he painted um, a couple of years ago, and I was fortunate enough to receive it from him just a few months before he had passed away. So that's in um, my living room right now. So so I'm able to see him every day, and you know, yeah.
That's
So
amazing. Oh my
yeah.
gosh, what a huge gift. So I'm curious, do you think the artistic spirit or tendency runs in your family?
You know, I believe it does because I remember when I told my parents, like I'm going to be a filmmaker and all that. And they were very supportive of me. And, at first I didn't really know of anyone that was like an artist like me, I didn't really know that, but my uncle that I had just mentioned, he was a painter, and so he was an artist, and he also had written like poems, and he just, like I said, was just a believer of Jesus and God, and I grew up with him. He actually lived with us for a few years when I was younger, so he was just an amazing person. And later on, um, like my little cousins and all that, some of them, they want to do like some form of art as well. Like I have a younger cousin who's doing like little like stop motion videos, and like just like another cousin that likes to draw and stuff like that. And so I feel like over time, that artistic side really started to run in my family later on. So it's just been an amazing thing to see, and it's just really, really great to hear, like I said, your story, and to hear other people's stories of how they became an artist. So thank you for sharing that. So you may have mentioned this a little bit before, but how does your diverse cultural interactions, how does that help fuel your creative process?
Sure. First, I want to say I'm so sorry about the loss of your uncle. And I think it's so beautiful that just like he modeled artistic capacity or capability to you, now you're doing it for others. And I think that's really gorgeous. It's like it's playing on in time. It's really beautiful. Okay, I'm sorry. Ask me the question again because I got distracted. Did you see that? I'm very distractible.
Yeah, is how do diverse cultural interactions help fuel your creative process?
Geez. I mean, you know, the simplest way to say it is knowing and seeing the different ways that humans create art or beauty. um, it's so good to see the different ways that people utilize what's around them. I'm sure you've seen those piles of garbage in India, and yet kids are still creating art from all that garbage. They're searching through it to find things to create beauty. Um, different parts of the world for painters use different mediums. I remember when I saw a piece of art and the gentleman said, "Oh, well, I coat this canvas with walnut oil before I start anything." And I thought, "What? What are talking about? I just don't understand. But quite honestly, seeing just how ingenious humans can be using what's around them, how ingenious they are um, using the visions and the stories of their myths and their fairy tales and to bring art and stories into the world helps me because I'm able to understand that there is no one way that is right to do things. And I think a lot of people in who, want to write a book or be an artist or do whatever, I think that they actually don't ever start because they think there's only one right way to write a book. There's only one right way to paint. It's with oils or acrylics. There's only one right way to do this. And so they never start because it's so overwhelming to toe the line and do what convention says has been the standard for so long. But when you live and have seen so much of the world, you understand that all that stuff is bunk. It's garbage. What you really should be using is your own imagination, what you've got around you, listening to the stories that are around you, and creating beauty or art, whatever that looks like, whether it's poetry, as you said, or a painting or a sculpture, creating from your own heart and your own mind while understanding the world is such a rich place. The sky's the limit because you can draw from a lot of different traditions as long as you're respectful and you give attribution, and maybe don't draw from sources where it's not okay. Like I would never write a story about an indigenous protagonist or because I've never lived that and it's cultural appropriation. So you have to be careful, as long as you're respectful and you understand healthy boundaries when you create things. Just seeing the great big wide world and all the possibilities out there, I mean, pretty much makes you unstoppable. So, yeah.
Nice, nice. Thank you for sharing that. Because like I said, it's really important to hear that and just to hear the different ideas and the inspiration that you can get from others and how that helps fuel your creative process. So it's wonderful to hear. Um, so we'll start to wrap up. So is there any like last minute advice or tips that you want to give to any up and coming artist that's listening in right now?
Yeah, you know what? It's the most boring one, but I think it is so important. So I always use the example of when I took a screenwriting course at Second City. And I believe it was a 10 to 12 week course. And at the beginning, there were about 8 or 9 students. But by God, by week 4 or 5, I was the only person who was still participating in the class. And I finished the class, turned in my project. No, everyone else dropped out. And it was such a stark reminder that most people start things, okay? There's no question about that. But very few finish. Very, very few have the tenacity and the willpower to go the long way and finish. And that's what we need. We need artists in this world. We need more art. We need more artists. But we need people who are going to go for it, do the long haul, commit, and actually finish. Because, I don't know, I read some weird statistic 95 to 96% of people never finish art, their project that they're working on. And just to be one of the people who actually complete something makes you a miracle. Okay? That's all I'm going to say. So never give up. Finish it. I don't care what it is. Finish it. So that's it.
Oh, that's wonderful to hear. Yeah, because no, I've heard that advice before, like I remember like when I did my first short film, like I wasn't sure if I would get it done or, like because there were so many like obstacles and stuff I had to avoid, but I was able to push through and I was able to finish it, and I was very proud of the outcome. And from then on, that's when I started to go into more filmmaking, and that's what sparked that passion. And then I went to film school and all that, and graduated from there, from DePaul University, because I'm from Chicago. So
Woohoo!
because you mentioned Second City, so I was like, oh yeah.
Yes.
So but yeah, no, it's wonderful to hear that advice because yeah, because I have seen people like even close friends of mine, like that say like, oh, they want to be filmmakers as well, or they want to do this creative thing or that, and then they kind of start, but then they don't end up finishing it, or they just kind of just leave and do something else. And and I understand, like things, in their life can get in the way and stuff like that. And, like, if you can't do this creative passion as like as a full-time thing, I always tell them, like if you can't do it full time, just have it do it as like a hobby, like just keep keep that creativity going, because there's going to be times in your life, where or days, like just some like bad stuff happens, life happens, like some bad things happen, and you just need that sort of escape, to create, to have that uniqueness in you, whether it's making like a painting or writing a poem or making a film, all that stuff, like, and, it does take time, of course, but if you truly love doing it, then then it won't be overwhelming for you, and because you enjoy it so much, you'll do the work and you'll continue to do that. So, and it seems like you're also continuing that creative passion, which I love to hear. I'm sure there are other artists out there that are doing the same as well. So just continue to have that creative fire in you, and you'll continue to do great things.
Thank you. Oh my gosh. Thank you. Yes, I have been cursed with the weird neuroses of having to finish everything I start. So, but thank you. Yes. Sometimes it feels like a monkey on my back, but when I finish something, the monkey jumps off and I'm like, thank God. So,
Thank you for tuning in to the Troubled Artists podcast. Have a great day.